In the kidney, there are tissue types that have developed from the inner, middle, and outer germ layers. The kidney, therefore, has 3 different conflict contents with 3 different meaningful, significant biological special programs, SBS for short. The kidney stones belong to the SBS territory marking. Before we get to the kidney stone that may become symptomatic, let's get back to the theory. The SBS is one of the territorial and separation conflicts controlled by the cerebral cortex, red group. DHS, Dirk-Hammer syndrome, is an event in which the affected person's territory was invaded or one was unable to stake out or establish their territory. As with all SBS, the conflict occurs completely synchronously on the 3 levels of psyche, brain, and organ. The DHS begins the conflict active phase. In the psyche, the person affected has obsessive thoughts about their conflict. An illustrative example is the male perceived external marking of territory by the burglar, while the female perceived internal marking of territory is a partner who cannot be tied to oneself. In the brain, you can see the active Hammer focus in the cerebral cortex in the male or female area. This ensures that the previously smooth squamous epithelium is broken down organically in the area of the urinary tract, i.e. the renal pelvic mucosa, ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. This is also the biological meaning of the program, as it increases the diameter, allows more urine to flow through, and allowing the person affected to mark their territory better. The reduction depends on the intensity of the conflict and the duration of the conflict. In the following, for the sake of simplicity, I will only refer to the renal pelvic mucosa. Due to the degradation, bumps and holes form in the renal pelvic mucosa in the affected area. Some of the urine that ran over it before the program started now remains in these holes. The best way to imagine this is as puddles, and in these puddles the solid components settle to the bottom and crystallize there to form stones. As a rule, this occurs without symptoms, i.e. unnoticed. If the territorial marking conflict is resolved, the affected person enters the healing phase. He is now mentally liberated. The load has lifted from the mind, the obsessive thinking is over. His territory has now been marked out or secured again. In the first part of the healing phase, fluid retention occurs in Hammer focus in the brain. This can be noticeable as a headache. Organically, in the first part of the healing phase, the renal pelvic mucosa rebuilds with swelling. This is painful and can be accompanied by blood in the urine. As a result of the reconstruction, the stones that have formed in the puddles are now being pushed up. They are carried in the urine towards the ureter and, depending on their size, they then become symptomatic in the ureter. The affected person is diagnosed with crystalline kidney stones. The epileptoid crisis in territorial marking conflict is the absence. In the second part of the healing phase, the Hammer focus is repaired with connective tissue cells, the so-called glia. The swelling disappears and the renal pelvic mucosa is repaired with scarring. It won't be like new, but it will be fine again. Martin Luther was born in Eisleben in 1483. In 1505, he, a cheerful person who was studying law, went to the monastery in a complete surprise to everyone who knew him. There is a reason for that, because something terrible had happened to him. Typical of the time, his life, after this sin, was heavily influenced by the fear of ending up in hell. Nothing motivated him as a monk more than the question of how he could obtain God's grace. Luther could only think theologically about everything that concerned him. He also tried to explain everything worldly in terms of God. So for him, his illnesses were attacks from the devil or tests from the Lord. He described the peasant rebellion against the brutal exploitation by the nobility and church as heresy, i.e. blasphemy. For him, the solution to his problem of how to obtain the grace of God could only be found in the Bible, the Word of God, and so he studied the book of books up and down. Around 1514, he made a discovery in the Bible that revealed to him a completely new perspective of God. Paul's letter to the Romans revealed that God's grace and justice could not be purchased materialistically, but could only be obtained through faith. A massive load lifted from his mind. He wouldn't end up in hell because he believed in God unconditionally. Logically, he was initially out of action in 1515 due to a long healing phase. Exact symptoms have not been reported. There is only talk of general exhaustion this year. In the following years, he spread his views and gained more and more followers. Out of initial astonishment, which later turned into anger at the ignorance of the church leadership, he posted his 95 theses on the door of the castle church in Wittenberg in 1517. Thanks to the invention of printing by Johannes Gutenberg, his theses were widely distributed. An anti-Roman movement is forming in Germany, and the Catholic Church can no longer avoid Luther. In his history, the Church has left out almost nothing that could be imagined as inhumane: torture, castration, slavery, war, child abuse, etc. The Church forgave its employees for almost everything. But money is no joking matter for the Church. Luther ruined their lucrative indulgence deal. That's why it fought him to the death. Luther himself could not understand this, and in his blue-eyed naivety, he actually tried more than once to dissuade the Pope from what he saw as an erroneous path. In 1521, the imperial ban was imposed on him. Luther was an outlaw due to the imperial ban, but was hidden in the Wartburg by the Elector of Saxony as Junker Jörg for his protection. The Reformation initially took place without him, and now things are getting exciting for Luther. Various movements, almost all of which were based on him, developed. Shocked by the misinterpretation of his teachings, Luther returned from the Wartburg in 1522 and led the Reformation in his spirit. He rigorously combats all dissenters. The Protestants increasingly asserted themselves against the Catholics in other European countries, and in 1547, a year after Luther's death, the church split was completed with the Council of Trent. Martin Luther's illness story is very well covered in the book Luther's Suffering by H.J. Neumann Researched. The most noticeable thing is his recurring kidney problems. Luther first had urethral colic in 1526. He already had symptoms in 1521. We hear about kidney stones in 1536. On February 8, 1537, he has symptoms again, and on February 19, 1537, it is so bad that he has urinary retention for 8 days. Try to get the matter under control with a catheter, a stone cutter, and an enema. Nothing helps. Even Philip von Hessen's personal physician can do anything. Luther is terminally ill, and his death is expected soon. But then the stone comes off on its own, and the urine is collected in 11 cans. Other stone faults occur throughout the year, one of which was the size of a bean. He continued to have irregular renal colic until his death a few years later. One cannot even imagine the pain Luther must have gone through. Why did Luther always suffer from kidney stones and colic in the urinary tract in general, and, in particular, what was the reason why he almost died in February 1537? As already described above, Luther found the solution to his salvation in Paul's letter to the Romans. This solution was his Reformation, his territory. It is known that Luther fought other reformers who did not agree with him, sometimes more harshly than he did the Pope. He will have caught the DHS at the Wartburg in 1521, when he had to watch helplessly as others used and misinterpreted his Reformation. He could not mark his territory, his Reformation. Other reformers repeatedly invaded his territory. He said about Erasmus of Rotterdam, "Whoever crushes Erasmus is strangling a stink bug, and it stings more dead than alive." He chased his old Dean Karlstadt out of the country and had his writings banned. He argued bitterly with Zwingli, the Swiss reformer, about whether God was really present at the Lord's Supper or whether this should only be symbolically. Luther said of Zwingli, "Zwingli is worthy of holy hatred." He covered his opponents with insults and attacked them unobjectively and personally. He called Thomas Münzer an archdevil and demanded that he and his followers be killed. He ruthlessly rejected efforts by other Protestants to unite. Luther tolerated zero deviation from his doctrine. It is understandable from his point of view, because if he could have been refuted, his personal salvation would have been threatened again, and the path to hell would have been open for him again. He was clearly recurrently conflict active in his regard. Every time his territory was successfully marked out, i.e., he drove away an intruder, the solution came. Tracks may have contributed to the fact that Luther had problems with his urinary tract until the end of his life after the Reformation. Who is surprised by his constant colic and kidney stones? This can be clearly seen in the Great Solution in 1537, the year Luther almost died of a kidney stone. In 1536, Luther wrote a confessional document, the Schmalkaldische Artikel, on behalf of the Saxon elector. In these articles he recorded the basic of the Protestant faith, i.e., the basics of his territory, the basis for not going to hell. In February 1537, there was a federal meeting of leading Protestants in Schmalkalden because of his confessional document. Every Protestant scholar who had something to say came to Schmalkalden and signed Martin Luther's confessional document. The Federal Assembly, with the recognition of his confession, was a big solution for him. Luther's territory was once again pretty securely marked, with the result that he almost died of a kidney stone in the healing phase that inevitably followed.